Yo, what's going on, E7 fam? Pat here, back with another how to play video, and in this one we'll be discussing one of the more interesting characters that has come out this year, and that is Navy Captain Landy. As with all of my how to play videos, I'll be going super in depth and covering almost everything you could want to know about this character, including things like stats, skills, a couple of endgame equipment builds for you to try out, and as always, matchup knowledge for PvP if that's your thing. With the introduction out of the way, let's waste no time and get right into Navy Captain Landy's stats. Navy Captain Landy is a light knight of the Leo zodiac symbol, which means she shares a stat line with Charlotte. Taking a closer look at her stats, she has 1,134 attack, 662 defense, 5,825 health, 99 speed, 23% critical hit chance, 150% critical hit damage, and no starting effectiveness or effect resistance. Dual attack chance is of course 3%. This is the highest attack score amongst all knights in Epic 7 and has a higher than average starting critical hit chance at 23%. Its defense score is average, and where it's lacking is in the health department, which is quite low for a knight in Epic 7, and speed at 99, which is well below average, at least at this point in the game's lifetime. As a bit of trivia before moving on to the skill section, in the English dub of Epic 7, Landy as well as Navy Captain Landy are voiced by Erica Luttrell, who we've talked about previously in How to Play Landy, as well as the preview for Navy Captain Landy just a few weeks ago. You may recognize her voice in works such as Steven Universe, as well as the game Apex Legends. In the Japanese dub of Epic 7, however, Navy Captain Landy is voiced by up-and-coming voiceover artist Feiru's Ai, who got her start as Hibiki Sakura in How Heavy Are the Dumbbells You Lift, but you probably know her as the voice of Jolene Cujo from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, or as Power from the recently aired Chainsaw Man. Currently, you can hear her as the voice of Linnea in the second season of Mushoku Tensei.
Allow me to demonstrate.
Navy Captain Landy's S1 is Precision Targeting. You acquire 25 Fighting Spirit upon use. It has a 1.1x attack multiplier and grants Navy Captain Landy between 20 to 25% combat readiness. Additionally, there's a 40% chance for this skill to activate Salvo Fire whenever this skill is activated. This includes counterattacks and dual attacks. Salvo Fire is an AoE attack with a 0.8x attack multiplier and an unusually high 1.3x PAL multiplier, making a hit slightly harder than the multiplier would suggest. This move also heals Navy Captain Landy for 80% of her current attack score.
Do not falter. Bang. Bon voyage. You lack discipline.
Precision Targeting might be one of the best skill ones in the history of Epic 7. 25% combat readiness is above average. We usually talk of a rate of about 15% here on How to Play. You could see it is 10% higher at 25%. This is still technically worse than Green Landy's, who is a 30% if she attacks a buff target, but hopefully you can see the point. Throughout this entire skill section, you'll notice that Navy Captain Landy seems to have one more turn on her buffs, or 10 to 20% more percentage points on skills when compared to the rest of the cast in Epic 7. My best guess as to why this is so that they could ensure that the character would release in a powerful state because she is the promotional character for Epic 7's World Championship in 2023. If that's the case, mission accomplished. Navy Captain Landy's skill 2 is her passive Ruler of the Sea. She is immune to the sleep and stun debuffs and has an innate 50 to 70% critical hit resistance depending on Molagora. At the start of battle, she grants an increased critical hit resistance buff to all allies except for herself for 2 turns. And if that wasn't enough, it also increases Landy's maximum attack by 10% every time she uses an attack, whether that's on her turn or not on her turn. And that last portion stacks up to 5 times. Ruler of the Sea is a pretty absurd passive. You can survive a lot of things that somebody with her low health and average defense score otherwise wouldn't be able to. I'm looking primarily at that 70% critical hit resistance, which basically kind of makes her function like a dodge unit when you really think about it. Navy Captain Landy's skill 3 is her signature skill, Mobilize the Warship. You consume 100 fighting spirit to use this move, and you acquire 3 souls upon use. Before this skill activates, it increases Landy's attack for 3 turns before using a 1x attack multiplier AoE attack that penetrates all enemies' defense by 60%. Additionally, this move stuns all enemies for 1 turn.
Blockade complete. Don't let them escape! Do not falter.
So, Mobilize the Warship hits like an absolute truck, and it's really not hard to see why. It gives more of everything than you're used to in this game so far. It gives 1 more turn of attack buff than most other skills. It gives 10% more defense penetration than usual. And the AoE stun chance is a lot higher than most AoE stuns in the game. The only 100% AoE stun in the game as of the time of recording that is not Mobilize the Warship is Silverblade Araminth's. And that is a character who is way squishier and does significantly less damage than a 60% defense penetration move with an average AoE multiplier. So yeah, this character does real damage on top of having pretty much the best AoE stun in the entire game. At around 3,000 attack with 240 to 250% critical hit damage, you could expect the floor on this move with no stacks of Ruler of the Sea to hit somewhere around 11k damage to most enemies that are around 1,200 defense. This number is going to close in on nearly 15,000 for a fully stacked passive. In short, this is the win condition that you are playing for. You are picking Navy Captain Landy for the purpose of surviving long enough to get to Mobilize the Warship. Assuming you aren't debuffed and the enemy team doesn't have a ton of immunity and defense on it, Mobilize the Warship should probably just win you the game on the spot most of the time you use it. It has for me, at least in most of my matches that I've done testing this character. Remember, by the way, this is a skill that requires Fighting Spirit to use. And you get that Fighting Spirit every time you trigger Precision Targeting on Landy's turn, or through a dual attack or a counter attack. It is entirely possible for Navy Captain Landy to quote-unquote high roll and get 4 counters or dual attacks before her first or second turn and fire off the warship, ending the battle in a flash. The footage on your screen now is proof of that. For a competitive game, a character with this much variance and this much firepower feels truly terrifying, if I'm being honest. Navy Captain Landy's Soul Burn for the cost of 10 souls guarantees that Salvo Fire comes out after precision targeting. No 40% chance, it is a 100% chance to come out, and it is a very good Soul Burn for a couple of reasons. 1, it's great because it's a bunch of AoE damage to soften up the enemy team. 2, the increased damage can actually pick off a specific character and secure you the game. And 3, which is perhaps the most important, you get that guaranteed heal coming out of the Salvo Fire, which is very, very good for making sure that Navy Captain Landy survives long enough. Remember, the character lives long enough to get to 100 fighting spirit and takes her turn. Mobilize the Warship's probably just winning the game again on the spot. So yeah, excellent soul burn for this character.
Allow me to demonstrate.
When it comes to Molagora priorities, it's a pretty difficult decision. I would probably max the S2 Ruler of the Sea first because it increases Landy's survivability, followed by the skill 1 for the bonus combat readiness, as well as the extra damage since it's the skill you're going to be using for most of the game. And then finally, max out Mobilize the Warship because it's the win condition, and you're not going to need it every single game, but if you do get to it, you're probably just winning the game outright. Might as well make sure it hits as hard as possible. Landy here is what I'd consider a hyper carry, and if you're really serious about playing this character in any form of PvP, I highly recommend plus 15ing her. Navy Captain Landy. What can I say? Was it the overloaded passive skill? The salvo fire triggering off dual attacks and counters? Or was it perhaps something more absurd, like the 100% stun chance stapled to a 60% defense penetrating AoE attack? Copy pasta aside, it's quite hard for me to place my finger on Navy Captain Landy. On paper, this character reads completely broken, but in my time with her, she hasn't felt that insane. There have been plenty of matches that I've played where this character feels just fine and doesn't really contribute a whole ton. And there are also a couple of games where she dies nearly instantly and contributes absolutely nothing. That said, there have absolutely been matches that I have played where I've either gotten blown out immediately or absolutely destroyed my opponent. If Landy wakes the hell up and starts spamming salvo fires left and right, she feels unquestionably like the best character in the whole game. Due to Landy's general popularity, the demand for the character, and how easy, honestly, it is to make the character, I felt that, putting out a how to play for her just as her banner leaves wouldn't be the worst thing. Again, normally I wait several months for these characters so we can compile all of the information. But for this one, again, we're going to make another exception. In this video, I'm going to talk about 2 counter builds for Navy Captain Landy that have been tried and tested over the last few weeks since her release, as well as give you a template for an injury build that is starting to make the rounds. Should there be other Navy Captain Landy builds in the future, as this character is still relatively new and information is coming out about her, I will pin them to a comment down below, so make sure you check it if you're watching this video sometime after its release. That said, let's get into it and start by talking about the counter set build on Navy Captain Landy. In my experience, this character is at her best when she is high rolling, which is why I am on the counter set with a Unity offset. A lot of high-end players prefer the immunity set so that way she can't be death broken at the start of a fight by a character like Ikarina, because if she does get that defense break, she might end up dying right away. But again, my experience is that when this character high rolls, that's when she's at her best. So it's going to depend on what you want out of the character, how you decide to draft her, and who you are playing her with. For example, I'm almost always playing this character with some kind of reviver or some kind of cleanser like Mediator Quirk. So for me, the immunity didn't seem as valuable as going for the high roll and getting the free win a bit faster if I did get lucky. That's pretty much my logic for why I'm on Unity. If for some reason you just can't hit the stats, feel free to use things like critical hit chance set, health set, or even defense set. Looking at the desired stats, I have 3,200 attack. I personally play a bit more than this at 34, and I've seen as high as 36. But that requires some really, really high-end gear. For some of you watching this video, if 32 is too high, try around 3,000 and about 2,900 or so, I think is the lowest end you want to go on this character. Again, the S2 Ruler of the Sea passive is going to stack up your attack. You don't want the base attack too low. You really need it to be a little bit higher up there so that way you can get the most amount of value out of that passive. Defense is 1,500 and health is 15k. I've seen 1,300 defense and like 17k HP. I've seen a little bit higher than this at maybe 1,600 defense, 16k HP. It depends on your quality of gear, but that's pretty much, I think, the ballpark of where you want Landy's defense and HP to be, somewhere around 15-15 or 15-16, somewhere if you can actually get it. Speed, I have 144. This is Landy's base speed with just 45 speed I-90 boots. I personally don't really like the base speed Landy, but I will show you that build after this one. It's not too much different than the desired stats that are on your screen. So yeah, if you want that, if you're having trouble hitting the higher attack, higher crit damage, 100% crit chance with good bulk, I highly recommend trying the base speed bruiser build, which we'll be talking about after this. But yeah, having her be around 135 to 155 speed, I think is a lot better, because then you can at least have her cycle and take at least 1 or 2 turns in a timely fashion throughout the course of a fight. Most of her speed is coming from her landing counters or dual attacks or things like that, because she has that 25% CR built in. So that is pretty much where you're getting the majority of your turns. But again, having a little bit of speed here does absolutely help on the character. Critical hit chance is 100% because we're trying to deal damage, and critical hit damage is 220%, which is just the base value with a 70% critical hit damage necklace at I-90. If you can go higher than this, absolutely go for it. I play around 230. I've seen a lot of people play around 245. 250 to 260 is the high end. It doesn't really get too much higher than this without sacrificing something drastically. Usually the attack starts to dip a bit low, 2,800, and I feel like that just overall doesn't do as much damage as having the higher attack with the lower critical hit damage on this character. Effectiveness of an ER, no, nothing here because we're not a debuffer and we're not a cleanser. Dual attack chance, you can see here, is 11%. I am on Unity set because, again, I want a high roll. If you high roll with this character, you get a really, really fast Mobilize the Warship, which just ends the game, which is basically the reason I'm playing her. I'm playing her because Mobilize the Warship is just an absolutely absurd skill. Taking a look at the right side here, I'm on a crit damage necklace, but if for some reason you can't get the bulk stats, which I think is the primary thing you want in this character, because if she survives, she has a chance to get off Mobilize the Warship, and the damage from that should carry you through the game, and if not, you get the stun to carry you through the game. So if you're struggling to make the bulk meet, feel free to use health percentage necklace. Same thing here for the ring. I'm on attack percentage so we can deal damage, but if you're struggling with bulk, or you just happen to have like a health percentage ring with a ton of attack percentage, that is definitely an option for you. Boots, again, are speed for me, but there are combinations where you might have like attack percentage or health percentage boots with a bunch of speed on it and still make the math work with all of the per piece average stuff. So that is something for you that you can absolutely try if you're trying to go for this build that's around 135 to 155 speed. Artifact is Elber's Ritual Sword because, again, high rolling is what makes this character feel exceptional. You want the counters, you want the Elbrus procs, you want the Unity procs in order to get Fighting Spirit to 100 and then drop that Warship on them and win the game, which is why I think it is the best option for this character, almost no matter what build you're actually playing on her. That said, I have seen Mature Sunglasses be played by some people. I feel like if you get focused down, right, because once they realize you're not Elbrus, they're going to go for you if they see Mature Sunglasses, but it is an option. Holy Sack is another option you can play if you don't have Elbrus. It's a little bit cheeky if you want to play her on like Guild War defense or Arena defense. They might expect your Landy to not be on something like this. They might focus fire her to try to avoid Elbrus, and then surprise, it's on Holy Sack. It's definitely an option. Looking at our per piece average here, we're on 14% attack, 16% defense, 16% health, and 13% critical hit chance per piece average. Jumping on over to the base speed bruiser build now, it's not too much different than what we just talked about. This is what you'd want to go with for Captain Landy if you just want higher bulk stats and higher damage stats and you don't really mind foregoing the speed. I haven't had the best success with this version of Landy, but it's a playstyle preference. There are definitely people out there that prefer the slower Landy, and it does work for them. So if it's something that you're interested in and you have the gear for, go for it. Primary sets are the same for the same reason, and then the offsets, again, same thing for the same reason. Desired stats are a bit higher here on the attack stats. You could see 3,400 attack and 250% critical hit damage, which are obviously higher than the 3,000 or 3,200 attack from the previous one and the 220 critical hit damage. Defense here is at 1,500, could actually be as high as like 16 or 17, and then health here is at 17k plus. Speed here is at 99, which is the base, and then obviously the dual attack chance is still the same here at 11%. Looking at the right side gear, all the same options as before, including the artifacts. I leave it to you. You can notice here that the boots are HP percentage main stat, although that could very easily swap to attack percentage. If you have a bunch of HP percentage on your ring and your boots, that's something that you can definitely do. Again, this is primarily a set of stats for you to look at if you are interested in trying to get as high stats as possible on this character, because you don't want to play her on speed and you're just fully leaning into the Elbrus, the counters, and the dual attacks on the character. Looking at the per piece average, we have 18% attack, 16% defense, 13% health, and 13% critical hit chance per piece average. You'll also notice that there's some critical hit damage there at 6%, so try to squeeze that in if you exceed the per piece average on any of these actual pieces of gear. The final build to talk about for Navy Captain Landy is an injury set build. This is largely because Navy Captain Landy's counters are things like Last Rider Crow and Lethe, which are health scaling heroes, and she is an AoE character, and if you high roll with her, you will get a lot of salvo fires out, which means that you will potentially get a lot of injury built up on the opposing team. So this is definitely something that you can try out. I have only seen this played once or twice so far up until this point, but it does seem to be gaining some popularity, so I thought I would include it here in this video. Looking at the primary sets, we are in an injury set with a critical hit chance offset. You could use immunity, unity, health, or defense if you so choose. I have only seen injury played on critical hit chance set as the offset, and I think that's largely because you just need the stats in order to make it work, because it's very stat heavy. That's very true for characters like Edward Elric and Alencia and Bellion as well, so it doesn't surprise me that you need a high gear score build to play injury, and you need to get as much free stats as you possibly can. Looking at our desired stats, attack is 3,000 here, although I've seen as low as 2,800. I personally just don't like playing Landy at lower than 2,900 attack, so that's why we set it here at 3,000. Defense and health are same bulk as the very first build at 15 and 15 apiece. Speed is 160, which is, you know, about where I see a lot of these end up. There's a couple in the around 170. The fastest I've seen is like 180. I felt that I would play it safe with our stat calculations and go for 160 speed. If you can go for 170 and still get everything else, then by all means go for it. Again, most of these fall somewhere between 160 and 170 though from what I've seen, with 180 being like the top end. Critical hit chance is 100% and critical hit damage is 250%. Although again, you could go, I guess, a bit lower. You could go for that like 220 critical hit damage from the first build and go up to like 32 or 3300 attack. It's going to all balance out the same. I leave it to you to decide. Dual attack chance is 3% here because we're not on Unity for the calculations on this thing. We're using the critical hit chance set for the base calculations. Looking at the right side here, crit damage necklace, attack percentage ring, and boots are speed with the same flex options that we talked about in all of the previous builds for Landy. Artifacts are still the same. I think Elbrus is the best option on the character, although I think Mature Sunglasses and Holy Sack still have some value in here. Mature Sunglasses in particular, I think, has a bit more value on injury than Elbrus because we're not entirely high roll at this point. And if people realize you're on injury, they're going to hard focus you anyway. So you might as well get some kind of survivability artifact like Mature Sunglasses or Holy Sack. But I decided to leave it as Elbrus Ritual Sword because, again, there's still that same high roll scenarios like with the other ones because of Elbrus. People might assume you're on Elbrus and just ignore you again and get a couple of procs the first time out of it. But if you play at a higher rating or you see the same kind of like guilds all the time, they'll probably get pretty wise to the fact if you're playing this character on defense that it's not on, or it is on Elbrus, and then the hard focus you. So again, that's like the little mind game you have to play with injury. Do you want Mature Sunglasses for the survivability and the damage once they get wise to Elbrus, or do you want to just have that initial chance at high rolling with Elbrus? So again, your choice. Looking at the per piece average here, we have 9% attack, 16% defense, 16% health, and 11% critical hit chance. You'll notice also that there's 3 speed per piece average and also 6% critical hit damage per piece average. So if you massively exceed the average on one of your pieces, as always, try to pick it up elsewhere with the speed and the critical hit damage on another piece. Like let's say you roll really high on attack percentage, like 20% on a roll. Maybe you skip attack percentage on a piece of gear because it's already doubled the average. Pick up speed or critical hit damage there. As always, let's round out the video with some matchup knowledge. Landy is a character that is playing for her skill 3, Mobilize the Warship, so it makes sense that you want to draft her with characters that can help protect her. Unbound Knight Arwell is probably the best mitigation character for Landy, providing things like escort to save you as well as some barriers, and an on-demand stun to keep pesky things off of Landy if you get into a pinch. Last Rider Crow lends himself very well to a lot of AoE damage alongside of Landy, and is also usually played as a counter pick to Landy, so by having it on your team, you can have an Aureus user while also denying that counter pick. Cleansers are not amazing with Navy Captain Landy due to the fact that she is immune to sleep and stun, but there are a couple that are worth having. Maid Chloe, for example, gives you an attack buff as well as a revive if things start to go south for your team. Mediator Quirk, obviously great cleanser, attack buff, barriers, attack down to keep things off of Landy. Just an overall great tempo unit. Other characters that you'd want to draft alongside Navy Captain Landy are characters that answer a lot of the hard counters that we'll be talking about in the next section, such as Lethe or another hyper carry like Spectre Tenebria, should Navy Captain Landy receive a post-ban. Landy's weaknesses are pretty pronounced. She's pretty terrible against things that punish counterattacks, dual attacks, or extra attacks, such as Lionheart Sirmia or Rowana. She's particularly bad against characters that ignore critical hit resistance, such as Lone Crescent Bellona and Ikarina. Ikarina in particular is pretty obnoxious. It's the reason why we talked about the immunity set in the character build section. If you don't start on immunity with this character or have a way to give her immunity right away at the start of the fight, you could potentially be eating a rocket punch to the face, and Landy will just die nearly instantly. Other characters to avoid are obviously Last Rider Crow, because Salvo Fire is a spammable AoE, which will give him a ton of procs of his S3 mobile weapon Siegfried. And then finally, characters such as like Lethe or maybe even a Dark Corvus. You might not have enough damage to actually kill these characters before they activate their special skill that will kill Landy in one hit, and it comes with Extinction stapled to it, so you sure as heck are not getting her back. As for good matchups for Navy Captain Landy, it's almost everything in the game that I didn't talk about in the previous group of characters, although there are some that are a bit closer to even. Since Landy can't be slept or stunned, she's fairly good against control characters such as her sister, Pirate Captain Flan, although there are some characters like Solitary of the Snow that I feel like are closer to even. Solitary can't stun you, but she can attack down you and blind you, which might potentially hamper Landy, and you might not get too much value out of the character. High AoE frequency characters like Bellion will give you a ton of Elberus Ritual Sword procs as well as counter procs, so that's fairly good as well. Certain knights like Unbound Knight Arwell also don't really present much of a problem to Landy. The main strength of Arwell is her S3 stun, and since Landy can't be stunned, there's nothing that Arwell can really do to interact with this character. Oddly enough, Landy also has a fairly decent matchup against Lua, although I don't think I would advocate for you unpre-banning Lua or playing against her in general. She has a 70% pre-ban rate for the most part as of the recording of this video, and she has a 100% win rate at Worlds at the moment, so she's probably still the best character in the game, or at least very close to it. But yeah, Lua can't sleep Landy, and Landy doesn't really care about having her cooldowns reset, so surprisingly, like I said, Navy Captain Landy has a decent matchup against Lua. Just be wary of the fact that Luas are built on high effectiveness and can still defense break you, and a lucky opponent can actually just take Navy Captain Landy out of the fight. And that's going to do it for how to play Navy Captain Landy. If I missed anything, as always, let me know down in the comments below now more than ever, because this video is still going up within Navy Captain Landy's release window, which is typically something I don't do. If you do think that this video will help someone out, as always, consider sharing it with a friend or a guildmate. And if you want to see more how to play videos in the same style, there should be a playlist on your screen now. As always, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll catch y'all in the next one. Bye-bye now.